Well, good evening, everybody. Nice to have you with us tonight. Gonna get things going here pretty quick. This evening's performance is called Ragtime Era Blues. And I've done concerts before of blues and boogie-woogie piano music, but specifically tonight, I'm going to be playing Ragtime Era Blues way back in the 1910s. I don't know the correct way to say that. Is it the 19-teens? The teens? The 1910s? I don't know, but that's the era I'm going to be discussing. Now, I know none of you were alive to remember that, but there was some great music written in those days, and I might stray into some of the 1920s classic blues tunes as well. But, you know, one of the very first blues melodies is from one of the traditional ragtime songs of the very early days, and most people don't think of it as a 12-bar blues, but it is. It's the traditional 3-chord 1-4-1-5-1 blues progression, and the tune I'm talking about is called Frankie and Johnny. It was written about a real murder in St. Louis in 1899, and so let me start things off with that, and with it I always play the St. James Infirmary Blues as well. You will learn through tonight's concert that the 12-bar blues form was really not all that important in the earliest days. St. James Infirmary does not follow that pattern at all, but it's called a blues, and that's just because of a blue feeling, I suppose. Anyhow, here's Frankie and Johnny. Thank you very much. Frankie and Johnny. I was just reading a comment here from Audrey Van Dyke. She says, such a merry tune for a story that does not end well. Well, that's the thing about most of the blues numbers of the ragtime era. Many of them did follow the 12-bar blues form, but a lot of them were played up-tempo for dancing, and so they don't sound quite as slow and sad and bluesy as, say, the great Delta blues guitar players' music. The ragtime era blues were just ragtime songs with a couple of more blue notes, like the flatted third and the flatted seventh. That's really about all there is to it, and you do hear that in songs like Frankie and Johnny, which is one of the earliest 12-bar blues tunes. And not long after that, a man down in Memphis, Tennessee, actually I think he was born in Florence, Alabama, named W.C. Handy, got his start in the music business in 1909. He wrote a campaign song for E.H. Crump, who was running for mayor of Memphis, Tennessee. The tune was originally called Mr. Crump, and then it was published in 1912 under the title The Memphis Blues. And it's certainly one of the most important early blues tunes by the father of the blues himself, Mr. W.C. Handy. So let's do the Memphis Blues next. Here we go. Thank you very much. The Memphis Blues by W.C. Handy. Well, it looks a lot like a lot of my regulars have already joined tonight. I sure appreciate all of you. Nice to have you with us. And I do accept virtual tips for these concerts. All you have to do is send in a tip on PayPal or Venmo, just like we were in person. And the PayPal and Venmo information is in the postings and the chat on all three websites. If you want to help me keep this music alive, Small amount goes a long way. You know, that's true. Harry just made a comment. The verse of Memphis Blues sounds quite a bit like the old piano roll blues, which came many years later. I don't think it was anything conscious on the part of the songwriter. It's just a coincidence. Well, it looks like everything's working. Somebody says, love W.C. Handy. Well, so do I. And I learned a lot of his blues tunes from Johnny Maddox, who had actually met Handy in New York back in the early 50s. And he spent a whole day with Mr. Handy, and I talked to him about it many times, you know, everything that he could remember. And he went to the publishing company first, and then later that evening he had dinner with W.C. Handy at his house with Handy's family. And I think he played the piano for Handy when they were at the publishing house. And he wanted to know about the tempos for the early blues tune. And that's one thing that I harp on when I play this music, is that it was not real slow and sad like you think of the contemporary blues genre. It was played more up-tempo for dancing. Way back in the 1910s, you know, the bands and orchestras that played this music on 78 records were not playing it real slow. They were playing it for dancing. And Handy loved the way that Johnny played so much. He called him the white boy with the colored fingers, which of course was a great compliment. And I assume that he had the tempos right because he liked the way Johnny played. And so let's do one of the famous Handy tunes. I may not play Yellow Dog or St. Louis Blues tonight because I've done them so many hundreds of times, but let's do from 1916, another classic, the famous Beale Street Blues, named for Beale Street in Memphis, Tennessee, by W.C. Handy. Thank you very much. The Beale Street Blues. A classic by W.C. Handy, who's called the father, originator, and creator of the blues. And we'll do some more of his music tonight, but I thought it would make sense to kind of spread it out this evening. What else would you like to hear, folks? I'm happy to play requests, as always. Peter, I would hope you recognize that one. It's a very famous tune, very famous song of the ragtime era, actually, even though it's called blues. Weary Blues. Yeah, Leo, I'm going to play that tonight. Let's go ahead and do it right now. This is a piece not by Handy, but by one of the classic rag composers, believe it or not. You know, there were three great classic ragtime writers, Joplin, Scott, and Lamb. And the man, outside of those top three, the man who came closest to writing classic rags just as good and wonderful as the others was Arty Matthews, who lived in St. Louis, like most of the other great ragtimers in the 1910s teens. And he wrote one blues tune, probably at the request of the music publisher, John Stark, because it was becoming a fad to publish music with the title, with the name blues in it, rather. And so he wrote this piece of music, and it was published in 1915. And this is also important and influential because it's the first notated example of a walking bass pattern, the boogie-woogie bass. You'll hear that in the second part of the tune. I do it fairly up-tempo like a lot of the jazz bands do. Weary Blues. Thank you, folks. That's the Weary Blues by Arty Matthews, one of the classic rag writers. And now, a piece of music that I've got sitting on the piano. Again, the composers of this style of music included just about anyone, from the big city to the small towns, and from the famous songwriters like Handy to people who were unknown. And this one was written by someone, I know nothing about this composer. It says, music by Bert Bierstedt and his violin. Words by Clara Ormiston Moody. What's really strange is this music was published in Winona, Minnesota, and it says it was featured by the Bierstedt brothers at the New Sheldon Cafe in El Paso, Texas. I found this sheet music at my friend Fred Youngkin's house, and I have loved it ever since. It's unusual. It has a minor key verse like a tango, but it's called blues. Here's the original cover artwork. Some of these I'm going to show you tonight are so valuable, I'm not going to take them out of their plastic sleeves. Play for me those Juarez Blues. Hopefully y'all could see that. That's got to be a pretty rare piece of music. And I guess I'll play it for you now. That's about all I can tell you about it. I have loved it ever since I discovered this. From 1919, those Juarez Blues. Thank you very much. Those Juarez Blues. Well, I was hoping Fred was listening tonight and would get to hear that. I haven't seen anything in the chat yet. Well, here's a tune which is one of those songs that you might call a folk song because nobody really knows who wrote it. The Hesitation Blues was published multiple times in the Ragtime era, once by W.C. Handy, and then also by Billy Smythe in Louisville, Kentucky. I play the Billy Smythe version of it, and dozens of famous artists have done this song over the years. Gosh, I'm trying to think, who all has recorded this. One of them in the 20s was Art Gillum, who was called the Whispering Pianist, Art Gillum. I love his music. And years down the line, the Western swing bands did this. There's a terrific recording of this that was done by Sleep at the Wheel with Willie Nelson, believe it or not. But again, this is the old ragtime era version by Billy Smythe from about 1915 or 16. Here's the Hesitation Blues. Oh, baby, how long must I hesitate? Percolate, fingers. Percolate. Hesitation Blues. Thank you very much, folks. Well, send in some more requests. Happy to play them. If I know the tune by heart, that's kind of how it works. Sometimes it kind of distracts me. I'm reading the chat and we're talking. I know President Jimmy Carter just died, so that's big news. But I'm reading that while I'm playing the piano. It's kind of confusing me. Let's see. Let me check Facebook real quick too. Any requests? Send them in. Got a request for Gottschalk here on Twitch, but afraid that would take a lot of practice. I don't know any of his music by heart. Let me go ahead and do this piece of music that's sitting here on the piano. because I'm definitely going to play some more W.C. Handy tonight. And as I mentioned in the early days, ragtime and blues were very similar. There were two of Handy's tunes that he changed. He changed the title from rag to blues without changing a single note of the music. One was the Yellow Dog Rag, which became Yellow Dog Blues, and also this one from 1916. Here's the original copy of it. This is extremely rare. I'm very lucky to have an original copy of this. Johnny Maddox had two of them, and usually when he had a duplicate, he would allow me to have the second copy. It's the Ole Miss Rag, which later became the Ole Miss Blues, and this is the only instrumental rag that Handy ever wrote. This doesn't have any words. Yellow Dog had words to it. The Ole Miss Rag is also notable because it was one of only a handful of pieces that Scott Joplin recorded on some hand-played player piano rolls. And so there's been conjecture for years about whether Joplin may have had a hand in the composition of this piece, because Joplin was known to only play his own compositions. I think it's possible, particularly in the second strain of the piece. Anyhow, here's my version of the Ole Miss Rag by the father of the blues, W.C. Handy. Ole Miss Rag. Thank you very much. Oh my goodness. Peter Barks, he says, I feel like a dinosaur when I realize I'm the same age as YouTube. You should feel very young because I was around long before YouTube was invented. That's so funny. Oh, I see another request here from Leo again. I can do that for you. Snaky Blues. I was already planning to play that. This piece was written, boy, the dates are escaping me tonight. I think 1916, maybe 1915. Anyway, it was written by Will Nash, who was the pianist with W.C. Handy's orchestra. and it's called the Snaky Blues, subtitled An Etude in Ragtime. There's an unusual bass pattern in the second strain, which I emphasize a bit. My grandmother loved this piece so much, I played it at her funeral, believe it or not. She could never get the name right. She would always call it Snaky River or something like that. But it's actually called the Snaky Blues. Thank you very much. Snaky Blues, subtitled An Etude in Ragtime. See, what a lot of people don't understand is that for the first 2 decades of the 20th century, the term ragtime was used to apply to all different types of popular music. The term blues came along in a commercial sense a few years before the word jazz, about 5 years before jazz became known to the general public. No, Dylan, I'm afraid I don't know either one of those pieces. I don't know them by heart. I don't sight read as often as you do. I prefer to kind of have it memorized and practice it a bit before I play it. Here's a tune that was written by Spencer Williams, one of the great African-American songwriters from New Orleans, however you say it. And Spencer Williams wrote this about 1917 or 18. It's called the Tishamingo Blues. And many of you might find it familiar because it was used years later as the theme song for Garrison Keillor's Prairie Home Companion radio show. Here's the Tishamingo Blues. Thank you very much. The Tishamingo Blues by Spencer Williams. Well, a lot of this music did come out of the deep south, the southeast, as well as Texas. And here's one that was published in Houston, Texas during World War I, which at that time the term blues was still new and very in vogue. And because of the war, this piece of music is called the War Bride Blues. And I do play this fairly up-tempo, maybe even more so than it would have been done in the original period. But I just love it. And Johnny taught me this, and he said, well, repeat each section twice, and it makes the piece even better. So that's the way I do it. Next up, from 1917 or thereabouts, the War Bride Blues. Thank you very much. War Bride Blues. I see that request for Wang Wang Blues. I might play that after my break here in a minute. Checking Twitch real quick. I see some funny emotes. We're almost up to 150 on YouTube. That's great, folks. I'm going to play a piano roll for you. And this is a roll of a piece called The Long Lost Blues. It's a ragtime era blues piece. And the name of the man who's credited with writing the piece is J. Paul Wyer, W-Y-E-R. This is a famous melody, though. It's one of those folk strains that was used in a number of different songs. It was also known as My Bucket's Got a Hole in It. And then in the 1950s, the same tune was used in a rock and roll song, maybe rockabilly's a better word, called I Hear You Knockin' But You Can't Come In. It's the same melody as The Long Lost Blues. And this is a very unusual piano roll of the piece. It's a very early hand-played player piano roll. And I like those best, the ones that you can really tell are hand-played, that have the human emotion, the real human feeling, and there's kind of strange harmonies. You might even call them mistakes that are in this roll. But that's what I love about it, is it's funky, and you can tell it's played by a person. And this is what blues sounded like in the 1910s. It's a QRS autograph roll, so this is early. I'd say mid-1910s, not even late 1910s. I don't see a date on it. Here is The Long Lost Blues by J. Paul Wyer, hand-played by Harold Weber. And it says 0.30. I guess this only cost 30 cents at that time. I wish things were that cheap today. Long Lost Blues. Long Lost Blues. First time I ever heard that piano roll was at Trevor Tishner's house in St. Louis. and I thought it was really neat and unusual. I was very lucky to find just to find a recut of that player piano roll. Well, it's almost 7 o'clock here in Durango, Colorado, and I'd like to remind you that I do accept virtual tips for these concerts. All you have to do is send in a tip on PayPal or Venmo, and the information is in the postings on all three websites. Even a little bit helps with my career, especially in the winter season when I don't have as much work. Peter, the piano roll recut was made by Rob DeLand, who made all the wonderful blues tone piano roll recuts. Without him and his piano roll label, people of our generation would have no access to many of these wonderful ragtime piano rolls from the original period. Well, in your case, you're younger than me, so you may never have been able to buy piano rolls from Blues Tone because he's been out of business for a number of years, but I was lucky that I got a lot of them when he was still in business. He quit selling piano rolls on his website at least 12 or 15 years ago. And also, I'm continuing to make progress on the Durango Ragtime and Early Jazz Festival. Please join me here in Durango in person. The festival will be the first weekend of April 3rd through the 6th at the historic and beautiful 1887 Strader Hotel. And the formal concerts and silent film will all be at the Durango Arts Center, which is only 2 blocks away from the hotel and the Diamond Bell Saloon. So come to this festival if you can. I'd really appreciate the help and the support. I did launch the website about a week ago, so you can now go to DurangoRagtime.com. Check it out. You can see the lineup of the musicians and a more detailed schedule. You have to get the tickets through the Durango Arts Center. And hotel rooms, you can get those just by calling the front desk of the Strader Hotel. They are offering a discount for the weekend of the Ragtime Festival. If you need to fly in a day early or something, I think you can get the discount for that night as well. So that's a little bit about the Durango Ragtime Festival. One of the listeners in my YouTube chat tonight, Peter Barks, he will be performing at least a few of the events, including the banquets and the after hours during the Ragtime Festival here in Durango. I'm going to be very excited to have Peter here for the first time. He's a terrific pianist from the East Coast, only 19 years old. Plays mostly by ear, but he's very good, has a very neat piano style. And incidentally, there are 2 banquets with live music. All of the musicians will be performing, but you have to get those tickets separately when you make plans for the Ragtime Festival in April. You have to buy those separately from the full festival pass. I'm going to do a virtual concert next week, of course, on Sunday night, and I already have an idea what I'm going to do because I've done this about 2 or 3 years in a row now. For the first Sunday night of the new year, I'm going to do a concert called New Year, New Songs. It's going to be 2025, and guess a lot of us have quit saying 2025. It's too lugubrious. Is that the word? It's too difficult to say. So 2025 is going to be new songs, new year, mostly music that I have never played. I'm going to have some time to do some practicing this week, play some tunes for you that I've never performed, and some other things that I don't play as often. I'll be including some rare sheet music from my collection, such as the first edition of A Good Man Is Hard to Find. I don't think I've ever shown that on a live broadcast. I'm even going to take a little bit of a risk. I'm going to play a funny song for you called There's a Bunch of Clucks in the Ku Klux Klan from about 1921, something like that. I even have the original sheet music. So join me next Sunday, don't forget, for New Year, New Songs. But back to the Ragtime era blues now, and here's one that's on the next one on my list. This was written by the original Dixieland Jazz Band, right at that period where ragtime was becoming jazz, but it's called a blues, and so it's really sort of in between. 1919. This is called Bluein' the Blues. It's not very blue at all. much. That's Bluein' the Blues, written by the original Dixieland Jazz Band. Henry W. Ragus and maybe one of the other members of the band. Yeah, I love that piece too. Don't you, Dylan? It's terrific. I saw a request a while back from my friend Jim for blues that dates from the early 20s. We'll go into the 20s a bit now, leave the ragtime era behind slightly. This is from about 1921. It's called the Wang Wang Blues, and this was a very popular tune. It's done on records by Henry Bussey, who was a great trumpet player, a jazz band leader in the 20s and 30s. And he also had another big hit called Hot Lips. Being a trumpet player, of course, this was one of his hit tunes. So I play these together as a medley. We're going to do Wang Wang Blues and Hot Lips. And there's Hot Lips. Thank you very much. Along with the Wang Wang Blues. You know, I don't think I've mentioned it. If you're enjoying the music, please hit the like button, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and share the stream as well. It might help me find some new listeners. A fellow asked me in the chat the other day, why do you even bother with Twitch? And I told him, well, in a vain attempt to try and gain a few more young enthusiasts for this music. And he laughed and he said, well, I can't even get my 65-year-old best friend interested in it. It's an uphill battle sometime. I have at least 3 really great young ragtime piano players who are in the chat tonight. And there are a number of great young piano players, but the hardest thing for us who play this genre of music is not finding young people who can play it, it's finding an audience for it. It's really hard to get people to come sit their butts and listen to a concert anymore. Unfortunately, that's just the way it works, and that's partly why I've gone online. I want to play a piece for you now that's significant because I think it marked a change a little bit in style for commercial blues music. And this piece came out in 1920. It was written by a man named Perry Bradford. Mule Bradford was his nickname. Johnny Maddox met him too. The only thing he remembered, he said, yeah, he really looked like a mule. Not very nice, but it's true. But he wrote a lot of music. He was also a music publisher in the 1920s. He worked with important people like James P. Johnson, and he wrote this standard tune, which is called Crazy Blues. And what's unusual about it is that it was one of the first tunes ever recorded by a black female blues singer. Mamie Smith and her Jazz Hounds recorded this in 1920 with Willie the Lion Smith on piano, believe it or not, even though you can't hear him on the record. I have a copy of it that Willie the Lion Smith autographed. But anyhow, this is when the blues really slowed down and the style started to change just a little bit. So here's the Crazy Blues, written by Perry Bradford, made famous by Mamie Smith. And I don't know why, but a couple of years ago I started playing this as a medley with a piece that was written by Lemuel Fowler, who was one of the blues pianists from Chicago in the 20s. I just like this tune. It's from 1922, I think. And it's called He May Be Your Man, But He Comes to See Me Sometimes. So here's the Crazy Blues and He May Be Your Man, but... very much. A couple of blues of the early 20s. Well, I've got another one sitting here on the piano that I want to play for you. This is also from the early 20s, the period in which the blues kind of changed. And this piece was written by George W. Thomas, who was one of the great blues players from Texas. He wrote some interesting pieces of music. He was a brother of the blues singer Sippy Wallace, and I think his other brother Herschel Thomas also made records. George W. Thomas wrote a number of tunes, though, that have been recorded a number of times over the years. I won't say they were popular. I don't know that very many of them were. I love the New Orleans Hopscotch Blues, if you've never heard that. This one was the most successful of all the pieces that he wrote. Here from 1921. Make sure I get it exactly right. Yeah, 1921. It's called the Muscle Shoals Blues. There's the original cover artwork. He wrote one called the Houston Blues. I love that tune too. The cover art on this piece says by C.L. John. I thought that was Johnson, because if it was C.L. Johnson, that would be a very famous person, the ragtime composer. Anyhow, here's the Muscle Shoals Blues. Muscle Shoals Blues. Thank you very much, everybody. Well, let me see if there's anything on my list that I haven't played yet that I really wanted to do. Go ahead and send in requests, folks. Happy to take more of them. I'm probably going to stick mostly to the blues theme for the night, but go ahead and give it a shot. You know, anything you want to hear. I'll have some time to kill at the end of the concert tonight. Oh, okay. Dylan's been asking me to play one of Roll Morton's blues. No, I don't know New Orleans blues, but the only one, I think the best one to play for tonight would be the original Jelly Roll Blues. And this fits in because it was published during the original ragtime era, back when blues and ragtime were very similar. 1915, in fact, it was Jelly Roll Morton's very first published composition, and it's right on the boundary between ragtime, blues, and jazz. So, certainly the best. Yes, it is. Here's the original Jelly Roll Blues by the one and only Jelly Roll Morton from New Orleans. Thank you very much. It's the original Jelly Roll Blues, 1915. Some people have called it one of the first pieces of notated jazz music. W.C. Handy claimed that the break in the Memphis Blues was the first notated break in jazz music. That was many years later that he claimed that. Well, let's do a little bit of a ballad just to change things up. This is sort of associated with blues because W.C. Handy published his own version of this, even though it was a folk song. It's called Careless Love. W.C. Handy called it Loveless Love, and he wrote a verse for it. But this is just my own version of the song. Since it's associated with Handy, here's Careless Love. Endless Love. Thank you very much. Well, I thought I might play, towards the end of tonight's concert, a couple of pieces by one of my favorite piano players. I think he's totally unique because he was influenced by the classic ragtime fraternity in St. Louis. Those musicians, including Tom Turpin and Scott Joplin, but he was also one of James P. Johnson's proteges. They met and they worked together, and so he had an unusual style, played completely by ear, mostly on the black keys. His name was Charlie Thompson, and he wrote the Lily Rag, of course. That was his one published tune during the ragtime era. However, he was also known for doing some great blues and boogie. So I'm going to play two of his blues for you. The first one is called The Lingering Blues. He made a couple of 78 records, and that was the title that was used on the record. Most of his music was never published, but I was very lucky that Tom Breyer transcribed all of it for me many years ago. About 19 or 20 years ago. Anyhow, this is a piece by the ragtime pianist Charlie Thompson, but it was not recorded until he made his 78 records in the late 1940s. It very well may date from the ragtime era or maybe the 1920s. It's called Lingering Blues. Lingering Blues. Thank you, folks. And now one more by Charlie Thompson. I've been kind of saving this for the end because this is really more of a boogie-woogie than a blues. It's sort of in between those genres. And if I had to guess, I would bet it dates from the 1920s. It's called the Buffet Flat Blues. And I didn't know for years what a buffet flat was. I guess it doesn't hurt to tell you, it was sort of a cross between a speakeasy in the 1920s, but it was also a whorehouse. It's a house of ill repute, as U.B. Blake would say. So it's called the Buffet Flat Blues. But when Charlie Thompson made his 78s, they changed the title to the Derby Stomp. I guess, in the 1940s, people would have still known what that was. So they changed the title of it. But the real title is Buffet Flat Blues. A very unusual, fast boogie in the key of A flat. Buffet Flat Blues by Charlie Thompson. Thank you so much. Buffet Flat Blues, also known as Derby Stomp. Thank you so much for listening tonight, folks. I really appreciate all of you and your requests. I'm sorry I can't get to all of them every night. I like to do these themed concerts and try to answer requests as well. I mean, how could someone memorize that? That particular piece took me many years, but when you understand the harmonies behind it, the simple 12-bar blues, I think that really helps when you have a deeper understanding of the music. It's always helped me. Let me mention one more time that I'm producing the Durango Ragtime and Early Jazz Festival the first weekend of April. Check out the new website, durangoragtime.com. Let me know what you think of it and drop me a note. Sure would be great to see many of you here in Durango in person, and there's going to be a lot of other renowned ragtime and jazz musicians here. Piano players, but also one of the world's great jazz drummers, Danny Coots, Don Neely playing probably clarinet and saxophone. And, this is something that means a lot to me. So if you want to support one of my other ventures, come to the Durango Ragtime Festival. And I did not think that tonight's concert would be complete without a nod to the new year, and so I think I should play Auld Lang Syne for all of you before the concert's over. And when I was looking for the sheet music just yesterday, I happened to find a ragtime version of Auld Lang Syne. It's a Scottish melody. The Old Scottish basically means for old time's sake. This is the traditional New Year's Eve song, and I found this version of it that was written by Axel Christensen, who was called the Czar of Ragtime, 1915, and I added a few slow choruses at the beginning of it, and just thought I'd play it for you. It's not a terribly complicated version of the piece, but gives me something new to try. And here, in honor of the new year, a ragtime version of Auld Lang Syne. Thank you so much. There's a quick version of Auld Lang Syne, and with that, I'm very much looking forward to seeing you all online in the new year. Please join me next Sunday night for another concert entitled New Year, New Songs for 2025. And thank you also for the virtual tips. It's much appreciated, especially in the winter season. Hope you've enjoyed these blue tunes tonight that hopefully weren't too blue. And I'll look forward to next week. Good night for now, everybody.